Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Buxton Barrow Man, where I go through Buxton's history and clean up the town at the same time. Buxton, like most towns in the UK, has a high street, and a fair amount of shops come and go, so this video is dedicated to show them off. Starting at the western side of the street, flanking either side are some rather grand buildings. The left is the Grove Hotel, which dates as far back as the 1770s. Sadly, other than the stores below, it remains abandoned. And on the right is the recently closed down Nat West building, which is a beautiful Gothic style building built some time after 1876, as a building stood on the site previous, which was known before its demolition as the Lawson building. But in 1876 it was ordered to be demolished, and one of the reasons being is that it stuck out into the high street, leaving very little room for a pavement around it. A little further down, on the left, is the Winster Palace, designed by Samuel Worth and built between 1849 and 1853. The Winster Palace had a rather notable curve to complement the crescent just down the road, and the name Winster comes from the largest financial backer of the hotel, Andrew Brittlebank of Winster. And the building was utilised as a hotel and had extensions in 1882 and electricity in the building by 1903. But the building changed hands in 1914 and became the Royal Exchange, essentially an office building for the Buxton Lime Company. Part of the extension was demolished for the Spring Shopping Centre, built in the 1970s, which is getting rather dated itself on the inside. Sadly, most of Winster Palace remains abandoned today. Now back over to the right hand side, opposite Winster Palace, are the two newly rebuilt facades, which I've mentioned before in a previous video, but to recap, the current Pondon home is a facade of Denman Co wine merchants. I believe the store closed around the 1930s, but it's great to see a wonderful facade being brought back to life. Just a few stores up is Hargreson Son, who have been trading in Buxton since 1865. Impressive to still be around today. Back over to the left, on the other side of the entrance to the Spring Shopping Centre, is now Sacro Lounge, in a fairly new building, but before the shopping centre came around there was Miller's Cafe, which used to have a stunning over-the-top facade that was built in the 1930s, and the Millers were around for about 80 years or so before they closed in the 90s. Further up the street, now on the right hand side, is a rather drab and out-of-place building that Argos occupies. But before the current building was constructed in the 1970s, there was a rather grand building for Milligans Drapery, a rather high-class store founded by John Milligan in 1849. Interestingly, Milligans was bought out by a local department store owner, Arthur James Potter, who owned the still strong business of Potters, and was the mayor of Buxton in the 1930s. Carrying up further, switching sides again, we come to the Yorkshire Trading Building, and it's what most locals still consider the Marks and Spencer's building, as M&S were trading in Buxton right here for 85 years before closing in 2019. Thankfully, this beautiful building has found a new owner, as the M&S building remained unoccupied for a long time. Moving up the street to Milton's Head, or Miltons Tap as it is now known, a pub that has been on the high street for some time, but I haven't a clue how long. Its name is fairly old, as the pub is named after the 17th century poet John Milton. But other than that, I can't find much online of how old it is, nor all the books that I have. But on the outside of the pub, there is an old lead seal that was put on by a fire service to state that the building was insured, so the fire service can help in an event that the building starts to go up in flames. Opposite the Milton is the old Maypole Dairy, which could have been trading in Buxton as far back as the start of the 1900s, and had some extravagant facades over time. Just further up is the Boots building, still occupied by them, but it is no way the same as it was in the past. Buxton's Boots had a library and a cafe, and definitely sold a lot more than pharmaceuticals. Buxton is also at least one of 3 boot stores that I'm aware of with the same elegant tiled facades, the other being in Nottingham, the home of Boots, and Sheffield. Continuing on the right hand side, I'm not too sure on their history, but I want to mention them, In front of the old White Lion pub, which has stood off the High Street since 1798, there are two rather odd-looking buildings semi-connected together. These are pavilion-like shop structures with lovely stained glass elements. Because I don't know too much about them, we shall move on, getting very close to the end of the High Street now. The current location for the job centre was home to Buxton's very own cinema. The Spa Cinema, an imposing Art Deco style building that lasted from 1937 to 1986. Before that though, there was another cinema, the Picture House, which was built in 1912. And even this replaced another stunning piece of architecture, the Victorian Arcade. Sadly, I don't know when the arcade was built. And finally, at the end of the High Street is the lovely Art Deco Co-op building, which up until very recently was still a co-op. Well, there we go, that's a brief run through some of the High Street's most iconic shops and places. But before I end the video with me cleaning, I must mention Buxton Trading Post and the Buxton Pudding Emporium as two places you must visit today if you decide to stroll down the Spring Gardens. So after the video, I went and grabbed my wheelbarrow and cleaned 2 full wheelbarrows worth of rubbish around Buxton. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and until next time, ta-ra!